I'm out here at Midwest Worms Worm Farm, and anyway, this is the owner, Kyle, and behind him here are some of the windrows for his worm farm, and we're going to actually harvest some European Nightcrawlers, and then you'll get to see how that process works with harvesting them, bagging them, and then getting them ready for shipping. All right, so this is the how many feet long is it? The trommel?
6 feet.
6 feet long trommel. And so he's feeding the material in there. It's spinning pretty slow. What, like 15 or 20?
About 25 RPMs.
25 RPMs. So it gives the material a good chance to get screened, and we should see worms.
Pull out the right side.
So the word, okay. So worms are going to be dropping here to the left, and then this is bulk material that's not that doesn't drop through the screen. So this is a really convenient way to harvest the worms. It's too much work to try to harvest them by hand. It takes you an hour maybe just to harvest 1 pound. All right, and so the castings are dropping down below into these tubs.
Well, the first two towards the front, or under the 1/8" screen, would be your castings, and everything else behind that, the back two tubs, are going to be your bigger material, maybe your baby worms and cocoons.
So do you only you sell the castings from the first 2 tubs and not the last ones?
Yes, I don't sell through the 1/4 inch.
Okay.
I reprocess those back in the system and let the worms eat them some more.
So the first 2 tubs here are 1/8 inch, are castings that go through 1/8 inch screen, and so they're very, very fine. And then down here, the other 2 are through 1/4 inch, and some people will use the 1/4 inch screen, but you don't get as fine of a casting, and you lose cocoons, because see right there's a cocoon that fell through the 1/4 inch screen. So if you want to keep your cocoons so they can turn into new worms, 1/8 inch screen is the way to go. All right, so dumping that material in there, and then just kind of scoots it on down, and we're getting a nice pile of worms here. And I'm actually buying these worms today. I'm really excited. So they're just kind of massing up right here. Nice mass of worms. And I've never fished with the European Nightcrawler before, but there are people that have used them for bait and have had really good results with them. What was it that you were saying about the European Nightcrawler, that why it makes it such a good worm?
Several reasons. One, they tolerate cold weather real well, so they don't really freeze up and become super still. They actually are probably the worm that wiggles the best in the water, and so I believe that is what draws the fish's attention. Okay, and it could be that they have a very unique color that the worms like, that the fish like as well. I just know that we've done studies where we actually had a retired fisherman that used to fish on the competitively.
Yeah.
And he tested red wigglers, European Nightcrawlers. He tested African Nightcrawlers and Canadian Nightcrawlers. And he said that the Europeans caught more fish in every situation. And he tried to fish multiple situations. He said the Europeans caught more fish in every situation than any of the other worms. We also talked to a operation called Kookaburra Worm Farms in Australia, and they ran their own fishing test, and they also found that Europeans caught more worms than any other bait worm. Now, they didn't use the Canadian in their test because they couldn't get them, so they used an Alabama jumper as their fourth worm in their test. And again, the Europeans were still the best by far of all of the four worms tested.
And you can actually, you can find the European Nightcrawlers at some bait stores.
Yes, some places, I think some of the Walmart stores, and there's a lot of bait operations that do sell the Europeans. I think that the Canadians are still the most sold bait worm in the U.S., but I know that Europeans are gaining a lot of ground on them, and would not be surprised if in 4 or 5 more years, if the Europeans are the most sold bait worm in the U.S.
And we can grow them right here in the U.S.
You can grow them, and Canadians cannot be grown in captivity. They are harvested out of the ground.
Yeah.
Up in the northern states and in Canada.
What I like about the European Nightcrawlers is they can just sit out on a shelf at room temperature, or take them with you fishing, and they'll stay alive all day in their little styrofoam cup. Whereas the Canadian Nightcrawlers, they don't survive too long out of refrigeration.
No, that's another advantage is the range that Europeans can tolerate is very big compared to Canadians. Canadians need to be kept around 50 degrees, between 40 and 50 to do well, whereas Europeans can tolerate between anywhere from 35 to 95 degrees without dying. So I think, there've been reports that they could tolerate up to 100, but I find that at 95 they start, they don't look too good.
They're not loving life.
They're struggling.
So here's the, oh man, they're looking so good. I think I'm gonna, when I get home, I'm gonna put a cup of these in the refrigerator. I think I'm gonna go fishing this week with them.
There you go.
Because there's more than I thought there was gonna be.
Yeah, and they're looking pretty good. I
Oh gosh, yeah.
maximum size, but they're real close.
They're bigger around than a pencil.
So they're pretty close to their maximum size, I think. They just look healthy.
Yeah.
They just look nice and healthy and plump.
Oh man. So this is just material that'll go back into the worm bin. I want to take a look at your premium worm castings down here. Do you ever use your own worm castings in your garden?
My wife does, yes. She'll ask me for a bucket or two every now and then.
Yeah, they feel pretty good really good moisture content.
Yeah, well, like I said, we've been fortunate that we haven't had any rain, so we weren't excessively wet.
People can buy the European Nightcrawler cocoons right from your website.
Yes, we sell the cocoons. We have so many Euros that we always have a lot of cocoons, and we sell them. They can buy as little as 100 or as many as several thousand. They probably sat inside the shop for at least 4 to 6 weeks after hatching before they ever went outside. So it's probably 4 to 5 months total.
Okay.
Since they were cocoons.
Because the cocoons don't hatch immediately.
they take about 4 weeks if they're kept warm. If they're in a colder environment, they take longer.
All right, this is the sorting room, basically where the worms are prepared for shipping. And so there's a bright light up here, and these are the worms that we just ran through the trommel and went into that bin on the left side. So unfortunately, you can't get 100% worms. You also get some material, and so there you do a little bit of sorting, pulling out bulk material.
Dive down. Now the very
because
top
I'm not seeing any worms, not as many worms on the surface
like
anymore.
If I go to an area where there's less, see, there's no worms. I could just kind of scrape off material off the top, and there's no Europeans in there. Okay. These guys are the most recently dumped from the system, so they still need a little time to dive in. But these ones here, you can see, I'm scraping off a decent amount of material, and I'm not getting any worms. There's one. Okay, and then I just kind of finger through it to
and they like to, they tend to ball up. Do the European Nightcrawlers ball up as much as the red wigglers?
Yeah, all of them will ball up in this situation because their number one goal is to get away from the light.
Yeah.
And so since they are a lot of worms in a small space, to get away from the light, they're going to just be working around each other and underneath each other and trying to get down. And they're all trying to go to the same limited space. So it's just going to make them more dense and more dense.
Mm-hmm.
And that's kind of what's happening.
All right, so we've been taking off the bulk debris, and which didn't actually take as long as I thought it would. And as you can see, it is mostly a mass of worms.
Show them the pile.
Yeah, here's everything that we pulled off. And
there's no big worms in here. Pretty much just we had a few babies we went ahead and threw in here because this is going to go back in the outdoor system so they can eat it down even further.
But basically, and this that's left in the top, we're going to pull the rest of it too. But you can rest assured that when you buy a pound or 2 pounds or 5 pounds of European Nightcrawlers from MidwestWorms.com, you are getting an accurate weight. There's not nobody's trying to pull the wool over your eyes or anything. And you actually weigh the worms separately and then put them in the bedding.
Yes, we will do this. Get all of this material that's not worms, okay, separated like you see, and then once we get this all completely cleaned up, it will be even cleaner than this when we're done. And this is almost pure worms already. And then what we will do is we'll put this bucket right here on the scale before we zero it, so that when we zero it, it's not even going to count the weight of the bin. So now it's zeroed, and then we will start weighing our worms. We'll get an accurate weight. If somebody orders 5 pounds of worms, we typically will put 5 pounds plus an extra 5 ounces, just because we know we're never going to get purely 100% all of this minute, even though most of it's gone. Okay, we want to make sure that the customer gets all that they paid for plus a little extra. We ship them in a much drier material than they like to live in. The reason we do that is because moisture transmits temperature. So if they're being shipped in the hot time of the summer, they will get too hot if the material they're in is too wet. If it's shipping in the cold time of the winter, that material will allow the cold to get in and they'll get too cold. So ideally you ship them in a drier material, and it works like an insulation to protect them from temperature extremes during the shipping process. But as a result, they get a little bit dehydrated. So when you first get them, you want to immediately put them in a bin that you've prepared with proper moisture. If you think it's going to be even 12 hours or more before you can get them from the bag into the bin, then what we recommend is you open the bag up and you pour at least a half a cup of water per pound of worms that you ordered into the bag with the bedding, so it will add moisture so they can start rehydrating before you get a chance to put them in your bin.
All right. Yeah, and you've been shipping worms for quite a long time, so you've worked out a lot of kinks.
We have. I mean, I'll tell you, we don't believe that anybody out there, no matter how long they've been shipping worms, has got it all figured out. Well, our goal and the way we've done this is from the very beginning. When we first started shipping worms, we talked to other worm growers and shippers. We started shipping exactly like they did. We have ordered worms from multiple companies before, and we watch closely how they ship. And anytime I see an operation that ships and their worms look a lot better or really good, I try to figure out why, and I try to incorporate that into the way we do it. And as a result, I will say we probably ship our worms in 3 to 4 times the quantity of bedding that we did in the beginning. And what we did in the beginning is the industry standard. So we now ship in 3 to 4 times as much material as the industry standard to give the worms a better chance of survival no matter what may happen during the shipping process. And we actually have had worms that have shipped out that never made it to the customer and were returned to us and came back to us 11 or 12 days after we shipped them, and they looked as good as when we were first starting, and we just shipped the way everybody else shipped. We probably had a shipping loss rate of probably, it's not real high, even the way that the industry standard does it. The loss is probably, if you take a whole year average, you're probably maybe losing 4 to 5%. But since we've improved our shipping methods, we probably, our yearly average would be less than 1% loss. See, as I tumble through this, it's pretty much pure European Nightcrawlers. Very little material.
And they are as plump as can be.
Okay, so this is the way we do it. So we would scoop this up.
And look how fat those are, too.
Scoop those up, put them on the scale, which I've already zeroed. You can see, because see, it thinks it's negative 9.5 ounces, because that's how much the bowl weighs. So that means it's zeroed with the bowl. So now I'm going to put that on there.
What do you got?
And that's 4 pounds, 9.3 ounces. So we're real close to 5 pounds.
Boy, somehow you almost nailed that.
Yeah, he wants 5 pounds, and that's what we were shooting for. And we had no idea pulling it from an outdoor system like this. It's not like our indoor systems where we always put 2 pounds per bin, and we know what we're getting. With this, it was a guess.
Yeah,
but we're pretty close. We're going to be a little short of 5 pounds.
For me, that's okay though, because I'm good with a little less. But if you were shipping this out, you would go and you'd get the other, even if it's just 4 ounces. If I was
shipping this out, then we would go out and we'd get another batch, and we would run it through the trommel and do the separation like we're doing now.
So it looks like it's only
it's
3 ounces shy of 5 pounds. Yeah. That's a lot of. If you were to use that for bait, that's a lot of fish and worms.
Oh, this is probably approximately between 350 and 400 pound. 350 and 400 worms per pound. So even at just 4 pounds, you're looking at probably around anywhere from 1,300 to 1,400 worms.
Wow.
There, so I know that's all worms.
Okay.
Okay, and then I would get now. I normally ship and my bedding is a mixture of their own castings plus peat moss, dry peat moss, to bring the moisture content down to that safe zone.
And I got a question for you. What is the benefit of shipping them in some of their own castings?
Well, and I can't answer this from scientific proof or studies.
But from your own experience.
From my own experience, what I found, but one, the guy who I know of that has the best success, other than me, for minimal losses during shipping, when I got worms from him, it looked like they were in pure castings. So I started thinking, that might be a way to do it. I talked to a couple other growers that have been doing this for 20 years, and they said the worms do very good. So what I do is I use their own castings, and then I add peat moss, because typically their casting, the moisture content of their castings is higher than we want to ship them in. So I'll take their castings and then add dry peat moss to it to bring that moisture content down.
And if I understand some of it, basically they're getting some benefit from like microorganisms.
Yeah, they're going back into the same environment that they came out of, which they were happy. Obviously, they look great, so they were doing well in that material. Okay, so it's already loaded with microorganisms, which is their natural habitat. So then you're just taking that natural habitat, adding some peat moss to it to dry it out a little bit. And another thing that most companies do that don't do, that we do also, is because Europeans especially, but we do this for all our worms, don't like an acidic environment. Peat moss is acidic, but it's a limited time, and usually it doesn't bother them to be shipped in just straight peat moss or even peat moss mixed with castings. But we always buffer our peat moss. We add a little bit of calcium to our peat moss when we ship. So here's the way I would do it. I would take this. This is almost 5 pounds. What I would do is I would take some of their same bedding, and I would put 3 pounds of this Okay, there's 3 pounds of bedding. I pour that on the worms. Okay, then I have a bucket here that I keep for this purpose that's got peat moss in it. And then I'll put 4 ounces approximately, depending on the moisture content of this. I'll go less or more. If the material feels excessively wet, I'll go more than 4. If the material seems a little dry, I'll go a little less than 4. But I'll do, on average, 4 ounces of peat moss for every pound of their own bedding that I put in there. So since I did 3 pounds of bedding, that would be 12 ounces of peat moss. Now I'm feeling this bedding, and it feels a little on the drier side, not as wet as some. So I'm actually going to go a little less. So instead of 12, I'm going to do 10 ounces of peat moss, along with that 3 pounds. So you can see they're almost going to be in 4 pounds of total bedding. Let's see, 10 ounces. Okay, so I take that now, I pour that there. That's going to dry them out so that they will not be too wet during the shipping process. Then this is my calcium, which is basically garden lime, pulverized limestone. And then I'll just sprinkle a little bit in with that peat moss. And then I mix the worms.
And the reason it's a little dusty is because it's actually sifted peat moss.
Yeah, it is. It's sifted peat moss, so it's very light. And then I will mix the worms in with this material so that they're all evenly spread out. And that way the calcium really blends throughout the whole thing, and so then now it looks like a lot, but that's because we already that's started off as pure worms, and then we added the bedding to it. And then we'll bag it up. We have different sized bags. This is the bag we use for basically 5 pounds, 5 or 6 pound orders.
And how much is too much worms to put in one of these bags? You've kind of experimented with.
Well, this particular bag can go as high as 8 pounds during cooler temperatures. I do not ever go above 5 pounds worth of worms in this bag during the hot time of the year, nor do I ship any more than 5 pounds in a box together during the hot time of the year. In the cool time of the year, you can go up. I go up as high as 8 pounds.
Because they're a lot more comfortable during shipping.
Yeah, because the cold weather is there. They tolerate the cold temperatures much better than they do the hot temperatures. So then I scoop it back up. And you can see, compared to that, it looks pretty dry. Now, they'll do well in this, but it's definitely drier than they want to live in on a regular basis.
So obviously when a customer gets their order, they don't want to leave them in this for too long.
No, you want to add, like I said earlier, you want to add moisture to them. If you're going to leave them in the bag for long, the ideal is that once they get to you, they need to be going straight into the bin that you've made for them, so they can have a more moist environment in a properly, in proper temperatures.
I think sometimes people worry about their worms arriving alive.
They do. A lot of people.
And I have worried about it too. But knowing all the steps that go into it, I think is kind of reassuring.
So then we just zip tie it. And then typically, you'll notice that the bag will be labeled. We typically, I will label the bag. Mostly it's for us, because when I take 20 bags over to my wife to box and ship them, she needs to know what's in each. So I am not really labeling these for the customer, as much as I am so that they don't get mixed up when we're boxing them to ship. So right now I would label this 4 pounds euros. And then that would go over there to the next building to be shipped.